My family chose to believe my abusive ex-husband who almost killed me. Now he's marrying my sister and my parents demand I keep supporting them. But 1 week before the wedding, they discovered who he really was, and now they're begging for forgiveness. I'm 31 years old. I work in corporate finance. And what I'm about to tell you basically destroyed any relationship I ever had with my family. It's not easy to talk about this, honestly, because even after all this time, I still struggle to process how the people who are supposed to love you can turn their backs on you the way they did. But I guess I need to get it out, you know? Because keeping this inside is killing me. I met Scott when I was 23. He was 25, worked in construction, and seemed like a normal guy. Nothing special, but there weren't any red flags or anything like that. We dated for a few months, and then I got pregnant. It was a total accident, obviously. And when I told him, he immediately said we had to get married. I wasn't sure, I wasn't even sure I wanted to get married in general, and much less that quickly. But he insisted and insisted. And my parents also pressured me because, they're from that more traditional mindset where if you get pregnant, you have to get married. So I went along with it, and we got married 2 months after finding out about the pregnancy. It was a small wedding. Nothing fancy. Basically the bare minimum. Things started to change literally from the honeymoon. Scott started gambling more, drinking more, and suddenly lost interest in finding stable work. I was like 3 months pregnant when he lost his construction job and basically stopped trying to get another one. He told me he was going to look, but then I'd find out he spent all day at home playing video games or at the bar with his friends. I kept working full-time at an office, pregnant, exhausted as hell, and I'd come home to find him sprawled on the couch surrounded by beer cans and dirty dishes. When I'd ask him to at least clean up a bit or do something productive, he'd get angry and tell me I didn't understand the pressure he was under, that getting a job was hard, to leave him alone. At 5 months pregnant, I had a miscarriage. It was horrible. I started bleeding in the middle of the night and told Scott I needed to go to the hospital. He was drunk, told me I was overreacting, and to wait until morning. I insisted, literally begged him, but he yelled at me to shut up and went back to sleep. I ended up calling a friend who took me to the ER at 3 in the morning. By the time I got there, it was too late. I'd lost the baby. Scott showed up at the hospital around noon the next day, still smelling like alcohol. And instead of comforting me or apologizing, he told me it was probably my fault for working too much and stressing myself out. Can you believe it? I had just gone through the most traumatic experience of my life, and he was blaming me. After that, everything went to shit completely. Scott never got another job. We lived off my salary, which wasn't much, and he became increasingly dependent and more aggressive. He spent all day playing video games. I paid for everything. The rent, food, his beers, his cigarettes, everything. When I'd ask him to contribute somehow, he'd yell that I was controlling, that I was making his life impossible. The stress was so unbearable that I tried to take my own life twice. Twice? You know what I mean? I took pills both times, and both times I ended up in the hospital getting my stomach pumped. Scott didn't even really care. He went to the hospital because he had to, but then told me I was being dramatic and attention-seeking. After the second attempt, I knew I had to get out of there. I told him I wanted a divorce. He went crazy, started screaming that I couldn't leave him, that I belonged to him, that he'd invested years in me and wasn't going to let me go just like that. I tried to stand firm, but then he grabbed my arm and started shaking me. Then he pushed me against the wall and hit me in the face, in the stomach, everywhere. He kept screaming that I was an ungrateful bitch, that I was worthless without him. He kept me locked in the house for 2 days. He wouldn't let me leave, wouldn't let me use the phone, nothing. On the 3rd day, I managed to escape when he went to the bathroom. I ran to the neighbor's house, literally barefoot and with my face all bruised, and called the police from there. They arrested Scott that same night. He spent 3 days in jail and then got out with a restraining order and mandatory anger management therapy. The divorce process took about 6 months because he did everything possible to complicate it, but it was finally finalized. As soon as I had the signed papers, I moved to another city, 5 hours away, and cut all contact with him, changed my number, blocked his social media, everything. I started therapy, got a better job in finance, basically rebuilt my life from scratch. Fast forward 2 years. I was doing well, honestly, had a good position as a financial analyst, making good money, living alone in a nice apartment, going to therapy regularly. I was still in contact with my family. My parents, they were already retired, and I'd send them money from time to help them out, because their pension wasn't much. I also sent some to my sister, Danielle, who was still living with them. Danielle is like 26 years old, dropped out of high school, had drug problems in her teens, and worked as a server at a diner near my parents' house. She was never very responsible, but she was my sister, and I wanted to help. One day my mom calls me on video chat and tells me she has exciting news. I say, okay, tell me, and she says Danielle is getting married. I was happy for her. I thought maybe she'd met someone who could help her get stable. I asked who the guy was, and my mom went quiet for a moment and then said, "Well, Michelle, it turns out it's Scott." I froze, literally. I said, "Excuse me? My Scott? My ex-husband, Scott?" And she said yes, that Scott had been going to the diner where Danielle worked, that they started talking, became friends, and then started dating, and that now, they'd been together for like 6 months and were getting married in 3 months. I couldn't breathe. I told my mom that Scott had beaten me, that he almost killed me, that the reason I divorced him was because he was a violent abuser. My mom told me Scott had told them a different version, that according to him, I was the one who had instigated everything, that I was controlling and emotionally abusive, that he only defended himself that time, he hit me because I had attacked him first. I told her that was completely false, but she said Scott seemed very sincere, that he'd changed a lot, that he was going to therapy, and that Danielle was happy with him. I called my dad, and he basically told me the same thing, that they'd spent time with Scott, that they liked him, that he was polite and attentive, and that they couldn't judge him just based on my version of events. My version? Really? I reminded him there were police reports, medical records, everything documented. But my dad told me that didn't matter, because people can change. I was devastated. I mean, my own parents didn't believe me. They were on my abuser's side. I decided to do a video call with my whole family present. My parents, Danielle, even Scott was there. I had all my documents prepared, photos of my bruises after he beat me, hospital reports after the suicide attempts, the police report with domestic violence charges, everything. I started showing them everything, explaining point by point what had happened. Scott looked uncomfortable but kept saying I was exaggerating, that things hadn't been like that I was manipulating the information. Then Danielle, my own sister, interrupted me and told me to drop the drama. She told me Scott had told her everything, that I had been a horrible wife, that I had pressured him constantly, that I lost the baby because I didn't take care of myself and then blamed him. When she mentioned the baby, something broke inside me. I yelled at her that she had no idea what she was talking about, that had been the worst moment of my life, and she laughed and said, "Well, maybe it was for the best because you would have been a terrible mother anyway, as crazy as you are." I went silent. My parents said nothing to defend me. Scott was sitting there with a little smirk. Danielle kept talking, saying I'd always been dramatic, that I always sought attention, that probably Scott hadn't even hit me as hard as I said, that I'd probably provoked him. She said, "Besides, Michelle, we all know you're the toxic one in the family. You've always been selfish. You've never thought about anyone but yourself." Then my mom spoke and said they'd decided Scott was going to move in with them after the wedding, that they were going to help Danielle and Scott get established. My dad added that they hoped I'd be mature enough to accept the situation, and that I'd keep sending them money like I'd been doing because they needed it. That's when I understood everything. I didn't care about the truth. They didn't care about my well-being. They only cared about the money I sent them monthly, and didn't want to lose it. I told them I wasn't going to keep sending them a single cent if they decided to support this relationship. My dad got angry and said I couldn't blackmail them that way, that they were my parents and I owed them respect and support. I told him respect is earned, and clearly they didn't respect my trauma or my experience. Danielle called me a selfish bitch and said I'd always been like that I thought because I made more money, I was better than everyone. Scott finally spoke and said, "See, Michelle, this is why nobody can stand you. You're impossible. Thank God I divorced you." I hung up the call and blocked them all. My parents, Danielle, Scott, all the relatives who tried to contact me afterwards to tell me I was overreacting. I cut all communication and stopped sending money. During the following weeks, they bombarded me with messages from unknown numbers, emails. Even some cousins looked me up on social media to tell me I was being cruel to my parents, that they needed me, that I couldn't punish them just because I didn't agree with Danielle's decisions. About 2 months passed, and one day, I get a message from a cousin I hadn't blocked. She tells me I need to know something important. At first, I didn't want to respond, but she insisted it was about Danielle and that I was right about everything. I finally answered, and she tells me Danielle had found Scott at the diner with another woman, basically hooking up with her in his car in the parking lot 1 week before the wedding. Danielle made a huge scene. They broke up right there, and the wedding was canceled. My cousin told me Danielle was devastated, that she couldn't believe Scott had done that to her, that she'd been crying with my parents saying she didn't understand how he could be so horrible to her. Can you believe it? After everything he did to me, after defending that guy, mocking my miscarriage, calling me a liar, now she was suffering exactly what I warned her would happen. I didn't feel satisfaction. Honestly, I just felt a deep sadness about how stupid my family had been. My cousin also told me my parents had tried to contact me through various relatives, but I had them all blocked. She said they wanted to apologize and talk to me. I didn't respond to them. I kept all the blocks active and moved on with my life. I didn't owe them anything, you know. They had chosen to believe my abuser instead of me, their own daughter, and now that things didn't turn out as they expected, they wanted me to come back as if nothing had happened. About 6 months after that, I received an email from my mom. I don't know how she got my work email, but it arrived there. The email was long, basically saying my dad had had an accident, that he'd fallen off a ladder fixing something at the house and broken his hip, that the medical expenses were huge, that his insurance didn't cover everything, that they needed my help. It ended saying they were so sorry for not believing me about Scott, that Danielle also wanted to apologize, to please give them another chance and please send them money to help with the hospital bills. I read the email 3 times. The first time I felt guilt, like, it's my dad. He got hurt. Maybe I should help. The second time I felt anger, because clearly they were only looking for me because they needed money, not because they really wanted to rebuild a relationship. The third time I realized it probably wasn't even entirely true. I mean, maybe my dad did fall, but I bet they exaggerated the severity and costs to manipulate me. I didn't respond to that email. I didn't respond to any of the ones that came after. I deleted them all without reading. I blocked that email too. My parents made their decision when they decided to side with Scott, when they allowed Danielle to mock my trauma, when they asked me to keep supporting them financially while harboring my abuser in their home. That decision had consequences, and it wasn't my responsibility to rescue them from those consequences. Now I have a completely different life. I got a promotion a few months ago. I make pretty good money. I have an incredible boyfriend who treats me with respect and love. I still go to therapy, but less frequently. And honestly, I'm at peace. I don't have family in the traditional sense, but I have friends who are my chosen family, people who support me, who believe me, who would never do to me what my biological family did. Sometimes people ask me if I miss my parents or if I'll ever forgive them. Honestly, I don't know. Maybe someday, but definitely not now and definitely not under these circumstances. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting or allowing people to hurt you again. And setting boundaries doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you someone who values themselves enough not to accept abuse, not from partners and not from family. What I learned from all this is that blood doesn't always make you family. Family is who supports you in your worst moments, who believes you when you share your pain, who protects you instead of delivering you to your abuser. And if the people who are supposed to love you can't do that, then they don't deserve to be in your life, no matter how much DNA you share with them,